Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. Happy Thursday, everybody. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. And yeah, good morning. Talking QB tiers today. Plenty of news, and maybe, just maybe, we'll play a game at the end. We will see what happens. But joining me on this lovely Thursday morning is none other than Fantasy Life Director of Analytics and all-around baller, if I do say so myself, Dwain "The Rock" McFarland. Dwain, it's a great day to be great, my friend.
Great day to be great, man. Got to go to a Jason Isbell concert last night, Ian. So now I'm getting to talk football the next morning. There's not really a better 24-hour period. Got to be honest.
About to say you are running hot, as is a certain Broncos running back. That's right. What a difference a couple of days can make. Let's get into some news. All right, guys, it's been quite the offseason for Javonte Williams. You know, Broncos beat reporters doing their jobs, but sometimes speculation tends to be a bit different from what we actually see out there in training camp. And yes, it was just the first day, but what a first day it was for Javonte Williams. From Sean Payton himself, he's lost weight. He looks trim. I thought he looked sharp today. He looked much different. His weight's down, and I'm proud of him. And additionally, we have Broncos beat reporter Ben Albright noting that he took the first rep in every single drill. Also added that he does have the toughest climb. That Samaje Perine has the toughest climb in order to make the depth chart. So Albright very tuned into what the Broncos are doing. And Dwain, his projection for this backfield right now is that Javonte will be the primary back with a 50 to 55%, target touch share. Jaleel McLaughlin as the Darren Sproles type, not quite Alvin Kamara, 10 touch a game type of guy. Audric Estime as the early down, short yardage, grinded out guy. Blake Watson, if healthy, being the scraps and return game players. So you obviously put together our lovely Fantasy Life projections. Is this about what we were expecting even before we started to get this good news about Javonte?
Yeah, I mean, we knew that it was probably going to be a committee, but I'm a little lower than what Albright has it at. But I mean, obviously, we're studying the way these teams have historically split things and stuff like that. But I have him at 40% right now. So I think I'm leaving the door open for, okay, can Javonte hang on to this? I still have him as the clear lead back, but I could see it being closer to 50%. So if we continue to get the good news, I'll move him up a little bit more. But again, Sean Payton has historically been very willing to use three backs. I do think that Javonte Williams, Ian, if he gets back to what he looked like pre-injury in 2022 when he had the ACL, LCL, MCL, I mean, it was a bad knee injury, guys, and it was in that October. I don't know what our expectations were for him last year, but we probably were too high, as far as him being prepared to get back. But this is one of the guys that had the most as far as missed tackles forced, yards after contact, these things that we know running backs own don't always equal fantasy points, but they kind of tell us about the state of the player, right? He was one of the best. And so I think coaches do care about that stuff. And I do think he should be the favorite to be the lead back. And if he is right, I think he's way better than anything else they have on this team. Now, again, it is Sean Payton, so I don't think you should project anything more than probably 55% would be the max I would end up going. I would see probably, if we continue to get the good news, Ian, having him around 45, maybe 50%, bumping him up from that 40% where we are right now. I think the main thing for fantasy managers to think about where they would take him in a draft. Right now, I've got him in that Devin Singletary range, Ian. So guys that we were projecting to be the leaders on their offense, but we're not crazy about their offense. I think Singletary's role's more, it's safer. But I also would argue that Javonte, if he's right, is the better talent between those two guys. So you're kind of making that decision. I don't know what your thoughts are, though.
Looking at Javonte's ADP across different providers with our handy dandy Fantasy Life ADP tool. Pick 104 on ESPN, 105 on Yahoo, and Dwain, I'm with you. Should be right there next to Singletary, and he pretty much is. Singletary pick 117 on ESPN, but up to pick 97 on Yahoo. So Ezekiel Elliott, Austin Eckler, Tony Pollard, and Tajay Spears kind of guys also going around that range. But I will say, everyone, I know that when Dwain says 45, 50% of the touches in Denver, it doesn't sound like a ton, but in Denver, Dwain, those should go a long way. Last year, the Broncos actually ranked third in terms of expected PPR points per game from their backfield. I mean, it was the Lions, the 49ers, the Dolphins, and the Cowboys are right after them. And it's unique because those are all top 6 scoring offenses. Not quite the case in Denver, but when we're playing full PPR and you happen to lead the entire NFL in targets, you tend to be able to create some fantasy-friendly running backs out of that. So Javonte, someone in that RB3 range. Again, Dwain, not saying I'm going to start start drafting him as his top 5-round pick or anything. But when you do have these 0 or hero RB builds, and all of a sudden you need to start stacking up running backs in rounds, 7 and beyond, Javonte does stand out as a guy where we get that week 1 snap share, and all of a sudden it's clear he's the lead RB1. I think he could be sliding into the weekly RB2 rankings sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and there was a period, you remember it, Ian, last year where they did thrust him into that role, but they figured out that he just wasn't quite back where he needed to be, with his knee. And I think that's why they added Estime. That's why they did some of the things they did in the offseason. But a lot of times these things are insurance plans, right? Or just to give a guy a little bit of a relief. And we can immediately, in our community, jump to the conclusion, oh man, like this guy's done. It doesn't necessarily, Audric Estime is still a late round pick, guys. Most of them don't work out. So, I mean, I think you Estime is a fine late round pick, but yes, Javonte and what these Broncos do in the passing game, nobody has thrown more passes to their running backs, back to 2010 than Sean Payton. Now, some of that's Drew Brees. Drew Brees liked to hit the running backs underneath. And some of that is, he had Darren Sproles and Alvin Kamara. But when you have an offense like this where we don't know anything, honestly, about the wide receivers other than Cortland Sutton, and he's not an alpha, you got to figure out ways to manufacture yards in your passing game. And Sean Payton's one of the better guys at it. These guys last year, Ian, 30% targets per route run for Javonte Williams. That's insanity. Samaje Perine was at 36%. So these guys, when they're out there, a third of the time, they're getting a target because we don't have the other wide receivers and tight ends, or at least so far. None of them have stepped up. I think the Broncos have some options to step up this year. But again, a really good chance for them to be involved in the passing game.
Russell Wilson certainly was a reason for that, with all of his checkdowns. But Bo Nix, guys, low ADOT in college as well. And to Dwayne's point, not too many other options to go. So I just hope we do get to see, a healthier version of Javonte out there. And historically, we have seen that from Dr. Edwin Porras over at Fantasy Points, NFL running backs who survived the year 2 post-ACL injury, improving their missed tackles forced by 17%, yards created by 9%, and even their receptions plus 39%. So good first day for Javonte Williams. Also a good first day for Patriots rookie wide receiver and second-round pick Jaylen Polk, seemingly already ingrained with the first-team offense. Now, I will say that, with this Alex Barth, shout out to the Patriots beat reporter, with the quote, I want to be careful because, the specific verbiage is he was one of the first wide receivers on the field in 11 on 11s and spent time with the projected top offense, but those chances came with a couple of catches. So I don't want to get carried away, Dwayne, because that could actually mean he was the third wide receiver out there and maybe, only had a 50-60% route rate. But this is a bit of a steady drumbeat to the extent that Patriots coaches and beat reporters have been singing Polk's praise, throughout the offseason. And, I think he was a top 40 pick for the reason. So, again, good news overall, not freaking out. But honestly, Dwayne, this is something where maybe just confirming our priors a little bit because a certain someone on the show already has a Polk as their number 2 most drafted wide receiver of the offseason.
Yeah, over 200 drafts in, Polk's my second most at almost 20%. But it's something we've talked about all offseason. If you throw everything else out the window and just look at draft capital, Jaylen Polk was the mispriced player, right? I mean, he was the guy that was going way later than what we were seeing with Ladd McConkey, even though he wasn't that far from him, in the draft. And then whenever you look at guys like, Ricky Pearsall that was going around him, and we really thought, well, Pearsall was a low-end round 1 pick. Jaylen Polk's an early round 2 pick with an actual path to playing time. Whereas with Pearsall, it's like he would have to run really pure. So there was just some weird stuff going on with where these players were going early on in drafts. But with Jaylen Polk, like the thing people need to know in the Fantasy Life rookie supermodel, which you guys can check out over on the site under Dynasty tab. And then you click on the models, and we've got data going back to 2018. We look at all the factors that really tend to be the most predictive for future success in the NFL. And whenever you look at Jaylen Polk, he came out at the 50th percentile, which was ahead of Ricky Pearsall, who draft capital's part of this, guys. He still graded out ahead of Ricky Pearsall, graded out ahead of Adonai Mitchell, graded out ahead of Xavier Legette, who went ahead of him also in the draft. So he was our 8th guy in the model, and he grades right next to Ladd McConkey. Yet you're getting him multiple rounds after McConkey. So this is a guy also that played in a big program, Ian. We've got multiple other guys. You had Rome Odunze go in the first round. Then you had Jalen McMillan also go as a day 2 pick. So it was a crowded offense, and that can push down your target shares, all the sort of things that we like to look at. And the model accounts for that, that's something that we really tried to do a better job of implementing into it this last season. And I think that is really helping Jaylen Polk. So this is a guy started off at Texas Tech, ends up going over to Washington and doing really well despite having to play with those other really great talents. So I think Jalen Polk is obviously, he's a guy I've taken a lot, but where he's going right now in drafts and for people playing in home leagues, you can get him with the last pick in your draft right now. We'll see what happens. We'll follow the news the rest of the offseason, but he's a great last round pick.
And it's one of these phenomenons where I think guys who kind of surprise us with being drafted earlier, we just don't see the ADP always catch up maybe as much as it should. I mean, I remember Peter Schrager, well before the draft even happened, actually mocking him number 32 to the Chiefs and basically saying this is a guy that NFL, teams are a lot higher on than some of the draft pundits. And lo and behold, he ends up going, just a few short picks after that one. So watching Polk in the offseason, my comp for him is Gen Z Robert Woods. We got to work on getting a nickname as cool as Bobby Trees. But yeah, guys, I would not rule out some good things happening here. One of the cheapest wide receivers in fantasy with a triple-digit target projection. And, Jacoby Brissett, top 8 quarterback in completion percentage over expected and EPA per dropback over these past 2 years. And maybe Drake May, I don't know, PFF's number 1 graded passer over the last couple seasons, could also be good at throwing the football. So don't hate the player, hate the ADP. And right now, we love Jalen Polk's ADP. Couple good news again to start the show, but we also got some bad news, guys. Kendre Miller is hurt again, looking like a hamstring strain. So sadly, again, the day 2 rising second year back is not looking like he's going to be healthy here for at least a little bit. We'll see what happens, but yeah, not good news. The quote from Dennis Allen is especially concerning because this wasn't even like a question about Kendre Miller. It was more about overall health on the team. And Dennis Allen, Saints head coach, direct quote, that's a player who needs to figure out how to stay healthy because you can't make the team in the training room. And Dwain, again, sadly, it's just been one thing after another for Kendre. Obviously, at the end of his collegiate career, he has to undergo meniscus and MCL surgery. And then he sprained his right knee in August before last season. He's hurt his hamstring in August before last season. And he suffered a high ankle sprain in November of last season. So only had, I think it was 51 total touches as a rookie. We were hopeful in a backfield with old and washed looking, at least in terms of their efficiency, Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams, that Kendre could be someone that would have this, nice path to, at a minimum, handcuff upside, if not maybe some sneaky standalone value. But this doesn't help, Dwain. I think it does, it should force us to take a longer look at what exactly would this offense look like without Alvin Kamara, because it's one of those things that I know we were talking about in our Saints preview where as much as I would love to see Kendre get the full-time job, 12 million reasons why Jamal Williams, I think, will stay a bit more involved in fantasy managers would prefer.
Yeah, I was actually really excited about Kendre. This is not good news. I think he's the best fit for this scheme, for what Clint Kubiak wants to do. So this is really coming from that Kyle Shanahan scheme. If you really go back to it, Mike Shanahan, back in his days in Denver, his offensive coordinator was a guy named Gary Kubiak, Clint Kubiak's dad. Kyle Shanahan's dad is Mike Shanahan. Like, these two dudes probably just grew up together. They probably, whenever, we're probably talking about whenever Clint Kubiak was born, like Kyle Shanahan was like in the waiting room. Like, they've probably known each other the whole life. So like, this guy runs that sort of scheme. And whenever he was the offensive coordinator in 2022 with the Minnesota Vikings, they ran the most plays from under center for all teams in the NFL. So that shows you they want to come out, they want to run heavy personnel, they want to use play action, but they want to hand the ball off to their running backs from under center. That's what that ground game is based around. And I really thought, there's a chance Kendre Miller is the guy that would be the best for that, right? You want to run the stretch zone plays, all those different things that you do out of that offense. They also have like cool power concepts, but he's the bigger back, more of the slashing back. But again, as Dennis Allen says, he's got to stay healthy. And at this point, like, it's just been one thing after another. I don't think Jamal Williams is actually a very good fit, like, for this offense, but he's a capable NFL backup, right? He's a capable player that we've seen, carve out roles in multiple different places. Did it with Green Bay for many years and drove us crazy with Aaron Jones, right? And then he goes over to the Detroit Lions and scores all those touchdowns. So yeah, I think it's a little bit crowded, but Kendre's still the guy I ultimately want to bet on. But I'm going to cool off a little bit here just because, like, the injury stuff, like, it's just the list is getting so long at this point. But if he gets healthy, the good news is we're still early, guys. We just started training camp. So if he's back on the field in a couple of weeks and everything's smooth sailing from there, we see him in some preseason games, I think he's one of my favorite late round sleepers.
Not like he was going too early in the first place. I mean, ESPN pick 153, over at Yahoo pick 134. Even in the underdog streets, I mean, only pick 146 over there. So someone that you weren't spending earlier, even mid-round draft capital on. But for the time being, Dwayne, I think we can, still say that similarly priced backs on, at least ESPN, Zach Charbonnet, Chase Brown, Tyler Algier, even Antonio Gibson and Marshawn Lloyd, Ty Chandler. Give me those guys over him for now.
Yeah, and I did an FFPC draft that was a best ball format. So an FFPC, it was the other night. It was the pros versus Joes. You have two running backs, two wide receivers, two flex. Which one was I? I was a pro, but technically the Joes are actually the real pros because they're the guys that play all the time. Although I play all the time too, so I don't know, whatever. You can call me whichever one you want. I had a fun time drafting, but my point being is like I took Bijan in the first round, took a bunch of wide receivers. And then I circled back around to running backs, and I took Zach Charbonnet first, right? And then I circled back around for Ezekiel Elliott. And then I came back and got Kendre Miller after that. So he's not going super high to your point, but he definitely has a ton of upside. And he's one of those guys, like if you do start off heavier on wide receivers and you find yourself in trouble at running back and you're trying to throw darts, I was hoping he could be one of them, Ian. But right now I think you just got to be a little bit more careful with it.
I, too, have been drafting a good amount of them, so we can only hope these injury guys will finally take mercy on our guy, Kendre Miller, before too long. All right, guys, those are the biggest three news items, but as you know, with every team now being in training camp, we had a lot more going on. So just going to run through some of the other headlines from around the league before we get into Dwayne's famous and award-winning, critically acclaimed quarterback tiers. So, yeah, Dave Canales on this Panthers offense. As we build our offense, we really try to feature someone. And for us right now, where is Deontay Johnson at? Dwayne's second most drafted wide receiver, Jalen Polk. And number one, Deontay Johnson. Moral of the story, draft Deontay Johnson. The Cardinals are looking to discover momentum. Cardinals coach Jonathan Gannon and several members of the staff did a deep dive on the concept of momentum going back to wars in the 1800s. And when asked after all that research, does momentum exist? Gannon said, perhaps. I have no idea. Just had to get that in there. That one was crucial. With the 49ers, Brandon Ayuk is holding in. Trent Williams is holding out. Difference is Trent gets fined and Ayuk does not. Injury updates. Gus Edwards had undisclosed offseason surgery. Not ideal, but he is back and at least practicing in individual drills. 49ers rookie running back Isaac Guerendo came off the field grabbing his hamstring. That's not good. No limitations for Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones. They are both fully cleared. In Jones's case, Dable clarified he will be getting all the first team reps. Again, free Drew Lock. Nick Chubb on the PUP list as expected, but ahead of schedule, allegedly, certainly squatting ahead of schedule. And Jared Mayo said Antonio Gibson will be back relatively soon. Few to my family and bank account. Greg Dolchitz also on the stories of the first day of Broncos camp. He is healthy for once and out there participating. Great day to be great, Greg. Some depth chart updates. Paris Campbell, the early leader for the Eagles wide receiver 3 spot. Damian Pierce getting the bulk of the reps with Joe Mixon out. Deneric Prince, again, the next man up in KC behind Isaiah Pacheco. Mike Tomlin says Russell Wilson is still in pole position as the QB1. Sorry, Justin. Dawson Knox not going anywhere and continuing to work alongside Dalton Kincaid. Just be careful about looking at the snaps because, again, we care more about routes. Elijah Mitchell getting first-team work with Christian McCaffrey, currently sidelined. Brian Dable talked up Devin Singletary, knowing the system and being that guy. I mentioned there being competition behind the artist known as Motor. And Jim Harbaugh said that Quentin Johnson, one of the top guys right now, quote, going to be a problem for people. So that is the news, everybody. But now let's give you guys a quick update on all the cool things we're doing at Fantasy Life, specifically Fantasy Life Plus. Now, if you guys were tuned into our show yesterday, which I hope you were, I think we had a very good time. Myself and Chris Allen really went through our Draft Champion tool, which for my money's worth is the coolest part of our Fantasy Plus premium package. And Dwayne, I mean, I know we've been using the tool a lot, but apparently Mrs. McFarland even getting in on the fun.
Yeah. She was testing it before the launch. I just handed the phone over to her. She knows a little bit about fantasy because she lives with someone that talks about it all the time and she overhears, but she doesn't play, guys. She doesn't play. She'll watch Cowboys games. She mostly just wants to watch Patrick Mahomes. So she's coming into this thing completely cold, and she's drafting these teams, and she's just following the advice. She picked the platform she's drafting on. She goes to ESPN, and then there's multiple ways you can look at it. There's a tiers view, Ian, which I personally like because I can kind of look and see, okay, if I take this player at this tier, I might not be able to get this other player at another tier, or there's more players at this position. But she just went with the straight up suggestions, and she just basically looked at the top 3 players each time, quickly clicked over to her roster to see what she had and what she needed, picked a player. She was done with her draft in like 10 minutes, and she had an A+. And she drafted the most like me, Ian. So, I mean, I was happy with it. She got an A+, and she drafted like me.
Funny how that works out. So again, Draft Champion tool. You can add your keepers, completely customizable league settings. Very, very cool deal. We have our ADP, consensus ranks, projections. Again, so much more, but it's that Draft Champion tool that I really believe stands out. And that could be yours for the price of less than a Chipotle burrito per month. Not Chipotle slander. Love my guys over there. But yeah, guys, not bad at all. So that's Fantasy Life Plus. Please subscribe over at fantasylife.com. All right, guys, now time for some quarterback tiers as we continue keeping on during quarterback week. And Dwayne, you're going to have your tiers live on Friday over at fantasylife.com, but everyone's getting a preview of that right here, right now. So looking at your tier one, we got the usual suspects in Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and Lamar Jackson. The next level of tier two QBs includes Anthony Richardson and Kyler Murray, obviously prioritizing some of these quote unquote dual threat aliens that we have. For my quarterback tier article, it was also this big six. I lumped them more into one because I'm a freaking wild child out here, Dwayne. But looking at that big six, was there anyone in particular you felt bad about not including in those big two tiers?
You know, I mean, CJ Stroud's the name that right now, if you go look at, the Fantasy Life ADP tool, where you're going to see him pushing into the top six on some of the sites, right? And sometimes that's over Anthony Richardson. So I think you could make it's the argument that it's him, because like we do respect the fact that, okay, ADP is meaningful. You can use it to help you, but he just didn't check enough of the boxes for me. And and to your point, if you look at those top six players, 5 of them are elite dual threat options, meaning they all have the chance to run for 650 yards, throw for 3,500 to 4,000 passing yards, right? That's all in the range of outcomes for those guys. So once you get to CJ Stroud, you don't have that anymore, right? He's got to run pure in the passing game. Now, there's a lot of positives for CJ Stroud, Ian. Like, love the fact that we've got Bobby Slowick, who I think is a great coordinator. You had Stephon Diggs to go along with Nico Collins and Tank Dell. And I think there is room for upside from where CJ Stroud finished last year. Because what did he do last year in the touchdown department? Only 4.6% of his passes went for touchdowns. Like, that could easily be 5.5%. The league average is right around 4.4. So CJ has room to grow. If he suddenly throws 35-ish touchdowns, he's going to be pushing to be in the top 4 or 5 quarterbacks this season. But I already know those other guys. Mahomes is in there. I know he's done it as more of a passer, but he adds more than Stroud on the ground as well. The other guys, it's just their legs, Ian. They've got legs. They know how to use them. If we want to go with a ZZ top song, but we know it's just a cheat code, man. It's a cheat code. So that's the thing that kept Stroud out.
And, Mahomes is also a sharp-dressed man as well. You see what I did there, Dwayne. But, yeah, man, look, with CJ, could he get there? Absolutely. But Mahomes, as much as those other guys are the dual threats, Mahomes might actually be the alien. And, yeah, he has averaged the most fantasy points per game in NFL history. So certainly understand giving him the nod. But, yeah, if CJ happens to improve somehow, which, hey, they did add Stephon Diggs, would make sense. Rising second-year talent in the league could certainly be in that tier this time next year. What was interesting, though, Dwayne, in your top tiers, a lot of people like myself do have Josh Allen, the reigning QB1 in fantasy football, as once again, the overall QB1. Not you, though, Dwayne, not this learned scholar. You actually have Jalen Hurts as the overall top quarterback. So, again, 1 versus 2. Okay, these guys are the QB1 and QB2 in terms of fantasy points per game over the past 3 seasons. But talk about what made you give Hurts, the leap over Josh Allen ahead of 2024.
Yeah, and this will be live tomorrow on the site. And I walk everybody through my tier methodology, right? Historical production matters. And what you just said, Ian, you're like, well, Josh Allen, for the last 4 years, like, you can't argue with historical production. Well, that's what keeps Josh Allen, right, in the top. But there are other factors. So like age, but offensive quality, that's the big one, like for me with Josh Allen. So we've got this change over to Joe Brady last year. And who knows, guys? This could have just been the Bills making an adjustment for a half of a season. They thought it was the best thing to help them win last year. Maybe not. Maybe it's not the same thing this year. But, I mean, they just threw the ball a lot less. And now we lose Stephon Diggs from the offense. So there is the question, can Keon Coleman step up? Can Dalton Kincaid? He was good last year. He wasn't great. Can he take another step forward, right? Can Curtis Samuel be enough? Like, is it going to work? If they can spread the ball around these 4 guys, can they get back to having a higher passing game ceiling? We know the rushing is going to be there for Josh Allen, and that was actually a positive. This dude took over 65% of the carries inside the 5-yard line once Joe Brady took over as offensive coordinator. So getting used much more like Jalen Hurts. 5 of those were quarterback sneaks. He scored on 4 of those. So the beauty of Josh Allen, Ian, is that whether they want to throw the ball or run the ball a lot, we've seen him thrive either way. But remember, we go back to before Stephon Diggs got to that offense. This is a guy that averaged 18.7 fantasy points per game. That jumped to 24 essentially over the next 4 years, having an alpha wide receiver. So that is enough of a question for me, paired with the fact that Jalen Hurts now gets Kellen Moore. And I'm not the biggest Kellen Moore homer, guys, but he knows how to push the fantasy cheat code buttons that we want from a fantasy perspective, which is using more motion. Last year, the Eagles, the most stagnant offense in the league. They used motion the absolute least. So imagine having a player like A.J. Brown and saying, we're not going to do cool things like what they do with Tyreek Hill in Miami. We're not going to do cool things like what they do with Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. We see those teams doing those things and being great with their great players, but we're just not going to do it. Well, now that's over. We saw what happened last year with Keenan Allen. Lots of motion there for Kellen Moore protecting him. Even when everybody else went down, they were able to protect Keenan. So I just look at this offense, Ian, and 55% more PPR points per route. Okay, if you have motion versus non-motion, and then that bleeds down to the quarterback level. So yes, I think this is a huge year for Jalen Hurts, who we know has the rushing up. He's what? If you had to pick an over/under, how many rushing touchdowns for Jalen Hurts, Ian? What is it?
12.
You got to set the line. You're the odds maker.
Probably 12, man. And that's insanely high. He's number 1 in the NFL in rushing touchdowns over these last 3 years.
Yeah. I mean, so it feels like he's a lock for 10 nearly, which is really weird, but it's true for Jalen Hurts. So let's say it's even 8, but that's still going to be probably more than everyone else in the league. So the rushing touchdowns, the ability in the rush game, and he's surrounded by all these weapons. I think that Jalen Hurts offers the bigger ceiling of the two this year. And I think their floors are actually more similar because we have to remember back to what did Josh Allen look like, for a full season before Stephon Diggs got there.
So, I mean, could the tush push success or even the usage change? We know when you subtract Jason Kelce and you add Saquon Barkley, potentially, but it's such a cheat code for him. I really don't see it going anywhere. And honestly, guys, what could outweigh that is if we see Jalen Hurts actually healthy, because he looked like a shell of himself running the football, honestly, for the better part of the second half of last season. So God forbid we see the rushing yards per game get back closer to 50. That could actually help offset, again, a minor decrease in rushing touchdowns. But I'm with Dwain, don't exactly see that one coming. So again, big 6 quarterbacks, even if you have them ordered slightly differently, I don't think there's too much debate there. But moving right along, Dwain, you did draw a line actually between the next couple of tiers, CJ Stroud and Joe Burrow, and Dak Prescott, your only tier 4 quarterback. Now, is that purely because of surrounding, supporting cast? Because if you do look at Dak, man, over these last 5 years, fantasy's QB3, QB1, QB8, QB14, most recently QB5 in fantasy points per game. Hand up, a couple episodes ago, I forget what team preview we were on. I was like, oh, Dak's more mobile. You were right. Okay, fine. Like, he definitely hasn't been putting up that many rushing yards in this last portion of his career. So he is a bit more like, Stroud and Burrow these days at least, but it is only CeeDee Lamb out there. Then again, when Dak's been healthy, it's been a top one, really the number 1 ranked scoring offense in the NFL. So talk through that.
Yeah, well, number 1, I think Dak ran really as pure as he could last year. Brandon Cooks really did nothing, but he caught some touchdowns, right? He came through big. Jason Ferguson definitely took a step forward, and then the whole offense was around CeeDee Lamb. Well, you also have offensive line changes going on this year. So when I look at it all, I'm like, okay, that's not that impressive of a wide receiver room. You have an elite with CeeDee Lamb, but everything else is question marks. And we're hoping Ferguson can take another step forward. But when I look at Joe Burrow, and I know you got Jamar Chase and you've got T. Higgins, right? You had Jermaine Burton, in the draft. You look at, CJ Stroud, we already talked about him. You've got Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, Nico Collins, Dalton Schultz. I mean, it's a loaded room. So yes, it really just comes down to that supporting cast. I think gives those other 2 guys slightly higher upside. But Dak lands in this next tier. I didn't want to drop him too far. I couldn't technically put him in their tier because he doesn't have this. The way I work the tiers is I grade all these things, previous production. I talked to you about their environment, their age is a factor. And so the age is the other thing. Although Dak's still well in his prime, guys, you'll see age 23 to 32 are the prime years for quarterbacks. And even then, once you get to age 33 to like 39, like they still are 85% of their prime. So these guys can play longer. So not too worried about the age thing, but still, it's like a small tiebreaker. He is a little bit older than the other two guys, doesn't have the same weapons, but still a guy, to your point, I couldn't move him down too far because his points per game they've just always been there. But would it surprise you if suddenly Dak was the QB 13 or 14, and we're talking about him more as a borderline QB1? We were already there early last season, and then they changed the offense, right, to center it around Lamb. Well, what if defenses adjust more this year? So I think there is a little bit of risk with Dak. I think overall you're probably safe that he's a QB1, but I just don't know that the upside that he can run as hot as he did last year.
I mean, the offensive line last year was good, but this hasn't been the elite top 5 group that I think a lot of people still assume they are for quite some time. This is not the 2016 Cowboys offensive line anymore. Only returned 3 of their 5 starters. I mean, what if 33-year-old Zach Martin just is no longer the single best guard in the NFL? What if a run game led by old man Ezekiel Elliott all of a sudden allows defenses to load the box less than ever? It does seem like, Dwain, that again, looking at this Cowboys roster from top to bottom, putting a lot of pressure on a Dak Prescott to, again, outweigh just kind of some of the problems they have. That is what he's being paid to do after all. But I'm with you, man. That's a big reason why I did take the Cowboys under. I think we could be kind of seeing the end of maybe not a full era here. We'll see what Jerry Jones has in store in terms of these extensions, but would not be surprised if we at least see the offense take a step back, which is not going to be hard to do because they have been that good. Reigning number 1 ranked scoring offense in 2022 after Dak's injury. They were number 1 in 2021. They were number 1 in 2020 before Dak's injury. They were number 2. So absolute juggernauts. We will see if they can keep on keeping on. In your tier 5, Dwain, we have Jayden Daniels again sitting alone with no one there beside him. Lofty QB 10 ranking. So I know personally I had him in a tier alongside Caleb Williams, but you are really going out here and saying Jayden Daniels, the guy to close out the top 10. If you're in a draft, is he the last quarterback that you truly feel good about rolling in without a second one? Because I do feel like after Jayden, there are enough question marks with the guys, or just, enough question about their overall upside that it almost warrants throwing a later round dart. So you're in your home league, you get Jayden Daniels, round 9, round 10. Are you done at quarterback more times than not?
Yeah, more times than not. Like you guys know your leagues. Just really depends on, how many bench spots you have and all that kind of stuff. Do your buddies take all the backup quarterbacks just knowing that, hey, somebody's going to get hurt and they're going to, try to screw you over, make you give them a bunch in a trade. Not saying that's a wrong strategy if you guys play in a league like that, but you know what they are. But I really wanted to have Jayden Daniels. I've consistently moved him ahead of consensus every time he moves up. Back when we first started really doing our rankings, like the industry was at 16 and we were at 14. And then it moved up and I'm like, oh, fine, we're going to 12. And then the industry gets to 12. I'm like, fine, we're going to go to 10 because I want you guys to draft Jayden Daniels. Do you walk away with anything from the show today? Jayden Daniels is the quarterback that I'm centering most of my draft strategy around this year. We talked about another one earlier this week in Kyler Murray. It's really those two guys. But Jayden Daniels, he's the cheapest. And it all comes back to being able to run the football. So he is the one, when you talk about the top 6, 5 of them have got that upside, right, to rush for 650 plus yards. Who's the only other guy after those are gone? Because remember, I've got Kyler in that tier. So do you, Ian. Mm-hmm. Once those guys are gone, it's Jayden Daniels or, the train's gone. Like the train's left the station. Unless Justin Fields takes over the starting job in Pittsburgh, which all signs point to at least that's not going to be early in the year. So you can't count on it. So Jayden Daniels is the guy. So I want to go after him. 14% scramble rate in college, Ian. 17% of the design rushing attempts for his team. Those are elite. Those are numbers that are going to come over with him to the NFL. I mean, he's probably going to have a scramble rate of 10 plus. Probably going to be 15 to 18% of the design rushing attempts. They've already talked about how they want to use him that way. We've got Cliff Kingsbury, who's already done those things with Kyler Murray. I think he's going to do it even more with Jayden Daniels. So just going to be really hard for him to fail, Ian. I know we've talked about this stat a lot, but it bears repeating one last time. 21 instances of quarterbacks recording 100 or more rushing attempts, okay, since 2011. But also, guys, did not throw for at least 3,500 yards. So saying, let's just say Jayden Daniels is not a great passer this year. He's somewhere between 3,000 and 3,500 yards. Okay, so we're not assuming anything great in the passing department. Still, that group averaged 20.3 fantasy points per game with an average finish of QB8. If you can run, even if you suck as a passer, as long as he's on the field, man, this guy's going to be a top 10 quarterback.
If you can run, you cannot hide from that QB1 ranking. And we have seen that again, really just from even bad quarterbacks. Taysom Hill, Josh Allen was QB1 overall, I think, during the last month of his rookie season once he came back from injury. Once Lamar took over from Joe Flacco, shell of himself of what he's become as a passer, still a QB1 in fantasy land because of that sweet, sweet rushing upside. So gotta love that. And gotta love our friends over at DraftKings. Guys, UFC 304 right around the corner, and we're excited about it. Looking at this card, I mean, seriously, from top to bottom, it is fantastic. But there is one bet in particular that stands out to me. And no, I'm not trying to be a freaking, know nothing homer here. But Paddy Pimblett, guys, is quite a bit younger than Bobby, a.k.a. King Green. And yet he is a plus 102 underdog over at DraftKings right now. So I know, Paddy probably lost that fight against Jared Gordon. He's gotten rocked in seemingly every fight he's been in. But you know what? I'm seeing Bobby Green getting dropped by Tony Ferguson, also having problems against Jared Gordon, and generally going out there, man, just not exactly looking like the most world-class version of himself either. So trusting the age, trusting the massive, I think, gap in terms of grappling ability if this fight goes to the ground. Give me Paddy the Baddy as my favorite underdog pick of the card. But yeah, guys, again, UFC 304, surely going to be a good one this weekend. We got the 2 title fights, and you can even get closer to the action. Check out our partners at DraftKings Sportsbook. New customers who bet $5 will instantly get $150 in bonus bets. All you got to do is download DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use our code FANTASYLIFE. And remember, the crown is yours. All right, Dwayne, we already talked a little bit about the CJ Stroud, Joe Burrow tier. I guess, the elevation they get in accordance with, their pretty awesome weaponry at the skill position units. But Jordan Love and Brock Purdy, also guys that we saw rip off top 10 quarterback finishes last year, and also guys that happen to be surrounded by a bunch of playmakers. So what is really the difference between these two groups? Because it's what ADP says as well. So, when we are making our tiers and rankings, we have to have ADP in mind. Even if you believe Brock Purdy is the best quarterback to ever play the game, he's going to be QB1 this year, why would you recommend taking him in round 3 when, people can get him several rounds later? But just again, kind of pushing ADP aside for a sec, do you see that big of a difference between guys like Stroud and Burrow versus Love and Purdy?
Well, with Burrow, we've got a bigger sample, right? And, he was the number 1 pick in the NFL draft. So when we've had healthy Burrow, we're talking 21 to 22 fantasy points per game. We know what we're getting. That even happened last year. Once he finally got healthy, you get rid of the first 4 weeks, right, where he's dealing with the injury, and he finally gets things going. It's only for a 5-game stretch, but what did he average? 22 fantasy points per game. So I just think we know with Joe Burrow, as long as he's healthy, you're getting 20 plus fantasy points, probably got a ceiling of 23 or 24 if he runs pure in the touchdown department. So that's the main thing with Burrow, why he's ahead of the other two, because Jordan Love, Brock Purdy, we don't have quite as long. They also don't have the same draft capital. Jordan Love was a late first-round pick. We've only seen a half. We've only seen a half of a season from Jordan Love, and we thought it was great, and we are buying into it. But that's not the same as seeing a full season from CJ Stroud. That's not the same as having multiple seasons from Joe Burrow. But this is the arbitrage tier to CJ Stroud and Joe Burrow. If you miss on them and you really liked that tier, then you should like the Jordan Love and Brock Purdy tier. So Purdy, look, his is a little more difficult. Like, how do I explain it away? Because really we've seen a season and a half with him. We feel pretty good about the sample size at this point. They didn't lose any weapons. I mean, they're absolutely loaded. He's going to have a good season. But what caused me to still lean a little bit more, like, I think the one you've got to compare him to is Stroud. I think Burrow, like, it's hard to argue against it. But with Stroud, I would say the willingness more of Bobby Slowick to throw the ball more than what we had seen historically, with the Shanahan tree, where, man, when they say run balance, they stay run balance. Like, they just aren't going to throw the ball. There's no chance they're throwing the ball 65% of the time this year. There's a chance the Texans do. And that if CJ Stroud remains efficient like he was last year, gets a little bump up in the touchdowns, and they throw that much, it'll just be really hard for Brock Purdy to keep up with him, even though Purdy's going to be hyper efficient.
Purdy only attempted more than 35 passes in one of his 16 regular season starts last year. So yeah, again, he's been the most efficient passer, bar none, over these past, season and a half that he has been the starting QB in San Francisco. He's going to need to keep being that, though, in order for him to make up for, again, that lack of overall volume going on. But hey, maybe we do actually see the 49ers open it up a little bit. In San Francisco, we certainly haven't seen Kyle Shanahan really unleash the passing game, but you go back to the 2016 Falcons, working with Matt Ryan and company, maybe just maybe they get that going. And to me, Dwayne, the especially wild thing about Purdy is, remember all the talk about the UCL surgery and his elbow, man, and for him to come out last year, beat the timelines from the doctors, and then really just look like nothing, was going wrong. Certainly someone that I haven't shied away from drafting by any stretch, but man, just the more I watch him, I mean, the off script stuff, like everyone lost their mind when Lamar Jackson did the whole drop back as a lefty and then threw it righty. Obviously he's a right-handed quarterback, but he dropped back lefty against the Dolphins and threw that long touchdown pass. I mean, Purdy was doing that all freaking season, starting as early as like week 4. So really some special things with Purdy. No, he's not Lamar Jackson, the athlete, but in terms of the passing numbers, man, few guys are playing the position better than Brock Purdy right now. And I think the mainstream media needs to shut the hell up with comparing him to Jimmy G. I do not know what they are watching with that comp other than just blindly looking at some of the yards per attempt numbers, which, man, they don't even account for the fact that Jimmy G was one of the most efficient quarterbacks as well in terms of these passing numbers. They try to make it out to be like a bad thing. So sorry for the rant, everyone. Let's get back on topic. But yeah, grinds my gears sometimes with that, Dwayne. All right, next tier, we got Caleb Williams and Trevor Lawrence getting the nod ahead of guys like Tua Tagovailoa, Jared Goff, and Kirk Cousins, who are, again, all one tier below. So for you, because I'm just guessing right now, Caleb, 27 rushing touchdowns in 37 college games, and even Trevor Lawrence, someone that we have seen, be willing at the goal line to try to score. Didn't work out in week 18 last year. Sorry, Jaguars fans, but certainly more rushing upside than guys like Tua, Goff, and Cousins. So for you right now, would this change though in formats that do reward 5 or 6 points for passing touchdowns? Because at that point, it would seem like guys like Tua, Goff, and Cousins have the most ground to gain.
Yep, exactly. If you're in a pure, league that's going to more reward the pocket passer, and that's how you do it, by giving them more points for their passing touchdowns, I would definitely be going with Tua, Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, even if they reward you for just more yards per pass, per passing yard. Like those guys could move up from a scoring perspective. But in a typical league, it's what you said. With Caleb Williams, I think there's the upside here that he could run for 400 yards, 450 yards. I think he's a safe bet for like 300 to 350, score 4 to 5 rushing touchdowns. Like that stuff adds up, man. And then we've already seen it from Trevor Lawrence, even last year, dealing with those injuries in his knee and stuff, 21 rushing yards per game. I mean, Kyler Murray was at 30 and a half. Anthony Richardson was at 30. Well, let's not say Anthony Richardson. He got knocked out of 2 of those games. I mean, so he's not at the level, obviously, of like Lamar Jackson. But if you look at the next level of the layers of the guys below that, and also closer to like Jalen Hurts was at 35. Josh Allen was at 30 and a half. So when you look at Trevor Lawrence, like we always knew that running capability was there, but it didn't show up as much. And so if there's an opportunity for him to carry that over, that's the main reason. Those guys, I think, can give you that extra 300 to 400 yards rushing, pick up a few rushing touchdowns that you just don't get from Tua, from Goff, and from Kirk Cousins. We're talking about guys that average 2.1, 1.8, and 1.8 rush attempts per game. Guys, half of those are kneels, right? Half of those are kneel downs. I've been trying to work to get the kneel downs pulled out of the stats, for some of this stuff. So they're not running the ball. If you look at their true design rushing attempts, they're at less than 1 per game. And that's a challenge when you start adding up all the little small edges over the course of a season.
Again, Tua last year led the NFL in passing yards. Maybe Raheem Mostert doesn't score 18 rushing touchdowns on the ground this time around. Kirk Cousins and Jared Goff are both top 10 quarterbacks in EPA per dropback and completion percentage over expected. Not saying that they're going to be going out there and throwing for 4,500 yards and 40 touchdowns, but man, there's a chance, particularly with Tua, who I know, Dwayne, you've been willing to, again, put that chip down on when discussing the quarterback specifically inside this tier. Moving right along, though, we have another loner tier, Justin Herbert all by himself in tier 9, getting lonely not only in real life without his wide receivers, but also in Dwayne's fantasy tiers rankings. So I do just wonder, Dwayne, because we have this weird thing where, again, all the history and the coach speak and everything tells us the Chargers are going to be this run first offense, but how run first can an offense really be when your backfield is led by Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, both banged up, and then Kamani Vidal, a 6th-round rookie, coming into play. So, yes, there is time for them to add a running back, but do you think we're underestimating Herbert, and is that kind of why he's in this tier of his own? Because this is a guy where First 2 years of his career, QB7 and QB2. Even last year, he was QB10 in fantasy points per game, despite dealing with various finger injuries throughout most of the season. So, I mean, if we, Sunday night review podcast after week 1, Justin Herbert throws the football 41 times. I mean, this could be a situation where I wish we had better guys to throw the football to, but maybe we are underestimating how balanced this Chargers offensive attack could be.
Yeah, I mean, he lands in this tier 1 because he's 27 years old and he's already shown that he can be a high-end QB1. That's how he lands in a tier of his own. It's just a terrible situation overall, right? I think there's no way that the pass attempts don't come down drastically. Now, could people be overestimating how far they're going to go down? Absolutely. And we're trying to middle that in our projections. We're not quite as aggressive as some other sites, but we still have them coming down a lot from where they were last season. And then you talk about the weapons. So you think about the process here. Okay, he's shown us he can be a good quarterback. He's still in his prime. Those are two very, very important things. Okay. But now when we pile on the fact that the scheme is going to be so run heavy, Josh Palmer might be your wide receiver 1, might be Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnson right now, not even running with the top 3 wide receivers, your first round pick from a year ago. That means DJ Chark is getting playing time. We don't really have anything here other than a committee in the tight end room. Sorry, Chris Allen. Shout out Will Disley here. You look at those guys, Hayden Hurst. So it's like, I don't know. I struggle to find a way to think, man, if I don't take Justin Herbert, I'm going to lose my fantasy league. Might Justin Herbert actually end up being the QB 14, 13? And I'm like, we were a little low on him. Yes, yeah. I think that could happen. But to suddenly look up week 4 and we're like, bro, Justin Herbert's QB 4. And then I just don't see it. I don't see that happening. I just think there's too many things stacked against him. But he gets in a tier of his own just because if these other things weren't going against him, he could easily be in the top 10. And you look at the rest of these players here, Ian, you can't say that about any of them. Jared Goff, we're already projecting like, hey, dude, he's an okay quarterback in an elite offense. That's what he is. Kirk Cousins, borderline QB1 with really good weapons around him. Matthew Stafford, same kind of thing if you keep Cooper Kupp healthy. But the system is pushing all these other guys up, right? Their weapons and the scheme they get to play in. Justin Herbert's the opposite, and he actually has the most important things. He's the most talented player in the group. So I had to call it out. But it's just tough for me to want to click on him, whenever I'm drafting right now. So he's not going to be any part of any of my strategy this season. And if I get that wrong and he is a QB3 in the league or something, I'll just be willing to live with it.
If he can start running like some Greg Roman quarterbacks have been able to do, because I actually, he's not Lamar Jackson out here, but could he be Alex Smith?
Do that, man.
From back in the day.
Yeah, but he's already a guy that averaged almost 20 yards per game. Do you think he gets past that? Could he get to 30? Maybe. If he did, that would be like Kyler.
Yeah. I mean, that's the path.
I don't think they're going to do that with him.
Not.
But
yeah. So again, if
he has shown to be able, so there's a chance.
If we had maybe not the single worst group of wide receivers and tight ends, maybe they aren't the worst. They're probably bottom 5 if we had to go through every single, group in the league. I'd feel better about it. But yeah, Dwayne, I remember last year, the Packers game was one of the best examples of a quarterback just getting freaking screwed over by the receivers, one big play after another. That was when he had Keenan Allen and other guys out there. So again, just not quite what we're looking for in terms of skill position groups. If we can add some actual, high-end guys in free agency next year in the draft, maybe, hopefully get a similar ADP, then we'll be back on the Herbert train. But for now, not quite so much. So Dwayne, again, those are your first 9 tiers, really encompassing the top, 16, 17 quarterbacks. A lot of guys, though, making up your remaining 4 to 5 tiers out here. So when I look at, your tiers 10 through 12, Matthew Stafford, Aaron Rodgers, Geno Smith, Deshaun Watson, Bryce Young, Will Levis, and Drake May, is there one of those guys that stands out where, let's just say you need your second quarterback, it's pick 160? Is it as easy as just saying Matthew Stafford because you have him ranked the highest, or is there one of these guys that you've just kind of consistently been going back to as you continue to draft?
Yeah, I think Stafford's fine. Like you could argue that he really belongs in the tier above with Tua, Jared Goff, and Kirk Cousins. But again, like age and all these little factors, and you guys, again, you'll be able to see it in the tiers article. I break it all down, push Stafford just a little bit below. But would it surprise us if he's the QB 10 this year? Absolutely not. Like, he's got the weapons to do it. He's got the scheme with the offensive coordinator. He's definitely got the weapons with Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. Little worried about Cooper Kupp, got to stay healthy, but it's a good scheme. to be buying into. But the name for me, Ian, in that group is Geno Smith. He's pretty much the forgotten guy, but we just saw 2 seasons ago that he can be a top 12 quarterback. We look at it, we've got DK Metcalf, we've got Tyler Lockett getting a little bit older. I have some concerns about him, but we have a first-round pick that got injured in the preseason last year in Jackson Smith and Jigba, right? And so I look at Jackson Smith and Jigba as being a guy that can take another step forward this season. We're going to supposedly get the unleashing of Noah Fant. I know some people are like, oh, well, big deal. Well, the underlyings on Noah Fant aren't bad. The problem's been he hasn't ever gotten, enough routes. So now if he's suddenly going to be on the field, well, he did go exactly. So you can't refute it. Okay. So his underlying data is pretty good. He went to Iowa, as Ian said. So there's weapons here. So he checks things. And then we get Ryan Grubb coming in to take over this offense. So I think we get a little bit more vertical here. You're still going to see a balanced offense, but you have 2 good running backs that defenses have to worry about with Charbonnet as well as Kenneth Walker Jr. So, Kenneth Walker III. I just think it's a great offense, man. And he's the most forgotten. He goes the latest across all these different sites out of the guys that we've been talking about.
Fair points all around. Again, I'm on the record. My most drafted quarterback of this offseason has been Deshaun Watson in these late rounds, but certainly do see the path for Geno and Stafford, both, just a year or 2 removed from top 12 finishes in their own right. Final one, Dwayne, I need you to just give me this in 2 or 3 sentences if you are okay with that. But favorite draft target in tier 13 plus, I will say, looking at yours, probably Daniel Jones. Yes, he is coming back from the ACL. I know the neck injury is also a weird thing, but he's healthy now, fully cleared, and he also, like Geno, just 1 year removed from a QB1 finish. But your turn, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, it is Daniel Jones. We just need to get some of the rushing upside back. So we can go with him. But I'll give an alternate Derek Carr. I just think with Derek Carr, you get the Clint Kubiak upgrade, going to get more play action, going to get more motion, going to get all those things. I like the couple of wide receivers that they have. So I think there's a chance there for Carr in your super flex leagues to give you some value, but only in super flex. Otherwise, guys, you're not drafting Derek Carr.
Derek Carr did tie CJ Stroud for the most 300 plus passing yard performances last year. People forget, but yeah, otherwise, please don't draft Derek Carr. Fun time, though. Make sure, again, you go to FantasyLife.com and check out Dwayne's full QB Tiers articles. That is going to be live on Friday morning, just like we will be again at 9 a.m. Eastern. I'll be joined by my friend and also pretty freaking awesome fantasy wizard, John Daigle from Establish the Run. We'll be talking some more QB strategy news and all that and so much more that we always get into on the Fantasy Life show. So subscribe, Fantasy Life Plus, if you guys don't mind. And otherwise, just have a freaking great day. So for Dwayne, for producer Matt, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life show. And until next time, take care, everybody.